Yesterday, with your substitute, you were supposed to learn about Prohibition and women's suffrage. Did you guys go over that in your books?
I did for
Here, so Prohibition. Let's turn to our pages. Pull them out, so we've got Prohibition and suffrage here. So they should be out on your tables because the group before was working on them.
You can put the other ones to the side. They might be kind of mixed now. Here's two suffrage ones,
Don't
and there's
have-
a prohibition one.
So start with Prohibition.
It should be 8 and 9 in your book.
Okay.
I know you. It's okay. I know you're not finished.
You got plenty of suffrage there. Okay, so there's a suffrage for you too. So we're gonna review Prohibition, but before we do that, can anybody tell me what Prohibition was?
a law that got rid of alcoholism or alcohol. They feel like it caused lots of violence and.
That's spot on, man. What's your name?
Richard.
Richard, good answer. So we'll go ahead and read this together if you guys want to pull it out. It's on your tables, the Prohibition one. The idea of banning alcohol in the United States began back in the 1830s. So we're talking like almost 100 years, 90 years before it actually came through. Many people believe that alcoholism was connected to insanity and violence and led to poverty. The temperance movement began to gain popularity as members called for the ban on the sale of alcohol to help put a stop to some of what they felt were society's evils. They preached that alcohol led to other immorality in society, like gambling and destruction of families. So what was the name of the movement that wanted to ban alcohol? It's underlined in
Temperance movement.
Temperance movement. And why did they want to ban alcohol again?
Because it caused violence, poverty, and destruction of families.
They thought that it did. They thought that it did. Supporters of Prohibition, like Mary Hunt and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, felt that Prohibition would promote morality and better health. Prohibition advocate Carrie Nation went as far as taking a hatchet to a saloon as she preached the evils of alcohol. January 16, 1920, the 18th Amendment went into effect. It banned the manufacture and sale of alcohol in the United States. Saloons were forced to close their doors. Are you looking for your Prohibition? We're not doing that one right now, though. We're doing this. You can finish your notes on that one later. We'll do Prohibition now. Many Americans did not feel that drinking was harmful or sinful. They represented government interference, and people who wanted alcohol found endless ways to get it. Illegal nightclubs known as speakeasies sold liquor. People called bootleggers made money by transporting and selling liquor illegally. Many people simply brewed their own homemade liquor. One result of Prohibition was the growth of organized crime. In nearly every major city, criminal gangs battled for control of bootlegging operations. So when you have Prohibition, when you make something illegal, but yet people still want it, what's going to happen? Say wearing hats suddenly became illegal. Wearing a hoodie suddenly became illegal. You've been doing it for all these years, right? It was part of kind of the way that you lived your life, but then you suddenly weren't allowed to do that. How would that make you feel?
Annoyed, confused.
Mad, right? You had millions of Americans that were, they weren't crazy, they weren't insane, they weren't criminals like the temperance movement kind of claimed that they were, but then suddenly they were made criminals by the 18th Amendment. So when you make something that people are used to having illegal, what are they going to do?
Riot, try and stop, bring back the thing they wanted.
They're probably still going to get it anyway, right? It's kind of the same thing with drugs now. Drugs are illegal, people still get their hands on. When the government isn't looking at regulations or kind of policing the use of certain things, alcohol in this instance, what do you think happens to the quality of the alcohol? Kind of like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, right, with the meat packing? What happened there?
People were informed of how the meat was like contaminated. So
Right.
they stopped.
It wasn't healthy for them, right? And then the government stepped in, had regulations for it.
Oh, so like they call it a problem and they hope for the government to come and deal with it.
Right. And so it made it healthier, safer. So here we're doing the opposite though. You had something that was safe and regulated. The government was looking out for it. Suddenly now it's illegal and they're not regulating it anymore. So what happened to the quality? What happened to the safety of the alcohol? The opposite of what happened with the meat packing plant, right? So when the government stepped in and made it better, it got better, right? If the government steps away,
Then it gets worse.
it's going to get worse. It becomes unhealthy. It becomes unsafe, right? So not only that, if people wanted to still get liquor, it was illegal to get it. What happens with crime?
That would increase.
Increase, yep, an increase in crime. Those people were called bootleggers. Bootleggers ran alcohol, got alcohol to people that and sold it illegally. And they sold it in clubs called speakeasies. Speakeasies are kind of, I don't know, some bars now still like kind of play this up where you can go and there's secret passwords to get into certain bars. You knock on the door. You've seen it in the cartoons maybe where the guy opens the little eye slit, you know, password please, and then they'll let you into the club. But it's kind of what speakeasies were. So the most ruthless crime boss of the Prohibition era was Al Capone in Chicago. He had a private army of over 700 criminals that seized control of over 10,000 speakeasies across the nation. By the late 1920s, most Americans realized that the 18th Amendment was a failure. In 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed Prohibition, but unfortunately the organized crime that it created did not end with it. Prohibition was an example of good intentions to help Americans, resulting in unintended negative and even dangerous consequences. What are unintended consequences? So what are consequences, first of all?
A problem. Like,
Something that happens, a result of something, right? Unintended.
means they weren't expecting it.
So what are some of the problems that they weren't expecting?
They weren't expecting people to like do it anyway or like illegally sell it.
Right, so here, then with the 18th Amendment, with Prohibition, what were one of some of the unintended consequences?
Speakeasies and bootleggers, like starting to increase.
Increase in organized crime, right? How about we talked about the quality of the alcohol. So that made it dangerous for folks too, right? Okay. Good job, guys. We're going to go ahead and watch a quick little video. All right, what did you guys write down? You want to share some of your stuff? Crime went up.
They said that they thought alcohol was a national curse.
What's that?
They thought alcohol was a national curse.
Okay. That the temperance movement thought that it was a national curse. Anything else?
And it wasn't illegal to drink the alcohol, it was just illegal to manufacture it.
Isn't that surprising? You always think of Prohibition as being, oh, you guys couldn't drink. But no, it was...
You could, you couldn't
Right.
make it.
So there were, doing research for this is kind of fun. There, you could get a doctor's order that you were allowed to have alcohol. Kind of like medical marijuana now, which is interesting. Also, the Catholic Church serves wine at communion, and they were still allowed to. So attendance for Catholics went up during Prohibition, so they could get their wine on Sundays. So, what else? Anything else that you guys wrote down?
When the laws came in, a lot of jobs were like lost because they were closing down places like saloons and stuff, and restaurants couldn't get much sales
Mhm.
in.
And that's an example again of, we talked about
Unexpected consequences.
unintended consequences. Exactly. Did anybody write down how much it cost the government?
$300 billion.
$300 million to enforce it. And do you think it worked?
Nope.
Nope. It did not. They repealed it, 13 years later. So, all right. So that's prohibition.